Moving on then to our big spotlight for this evening. The US government has put India, or will shortly be putting India, in the priority watch list under the special 301 report that it releases annually. According to an AFP report that was released today, and of course, if that report is indeed accurate, this will be third year in a row when India finds itself in this list along with Russia and China. The move allows US government to subject India to extra scrutiny and could also impose sanctions if the US brings such cases to the World Trade Organization. But what really is the Special 301 report anyway? Well, according to the USTR website, the report reflects the outcome of a congressionally mandated annual review of the global state of intellectual property rights protection and enforcement. This annual review looks at the prevalent environment in US's trading partner countries, on whether it encourages innovation and the nature of the IPR protection for creative work. This can include copyrights to protect the work of authors or musicians, or safeguard inventions in the form of patents that drug makers regularly use. What does this mean for India, especially in the context of the fact that India, remember, has to use the tool of compulsory licensing to provide drugs to millions of its people who simply cannot afford them? For more on that now, I'm now joined by senior advocate Prathiba Singh. Thank you very much, Prathiba, for joining us here on The Big Picture. Just tell us, in terms of what does this mean for India, because clearly this is an issue that USTR has raised with India on many occasions in the past. If once again, this report, the Special Report 301, does put India in this watch list, what is the larger takeaway from this?
Firstly, I want to say that I'm a little disappointed to hear this news, presuming it is true, because in my own opinion, in the last 2 years, the amount of positive activity that has happened in intellectual property has been unprecedented. I have never seen the Prime Minister of any country mention 6 times in his different speeches about intellectual property. Such has been the significant impact which Indian government is placing on intellectual property, and I myself would be very disappointed if this is true. And after I was called and informed about this report, which emanated from a press report, I checked the transcripts of the USTR hearings which took place in March 2016. One very interesting feature of those transcripts has been that there have been at least 10 positive big ticket reforms that those transcripts reflect very clearly. And in fact, the chair of the USTR acknowledges that, Christine Peterson acknowledges it in those transcripts. Let me list them out for you. The first is that cable piracy has been kind of curtailed to a very great extent. There have been no compulsory licenses issued. There has been a great amount of pharmaceutical injunctions that have been granted. Commercial courts have been established. The Camcording Act is about to be coming out. There is increased level of government-to-government interaction between US and India. The GIPP is now in charge of the copyright department. More examiners have been recruited in the patent office, about 750 examiners. All this has been acknowledged in the transcripts of the USTR hearings. And the 2 or 3 major issues that they raise repeatedly is, number one, Section 3D, which is of course a legislative mandate in India. The Parliament of India has enacted that provision, which is TRIPS compliant. The second major issue that they keep highlighting is compulsory licensing. I don't know how that is an issue right now, because there has been no CL issued in the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
And the third area,
Prathiba,
that is copyright. That is copyright.
No, if I could just ask you a question, if I could just squeeze in a question. I mean, like, your points are well taken there, Prathiba. So essentially what you're saying is that since, the NDA government has come in, there is more of an acknowledgement of the need to strengthen the IPR regime in the country, because as you rightly said, that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been mentioning IPR and IPR related issues in many of his speeches. In fact, he's also set up an IPR think tank. There is also a draft IPR policy now. So purely in terms of a comparison, if we were to draw one between the UPA government and the NDA government, there seems to be more acknowledgement and realization that there needs to be, at least India needs to strengthen its IPR rules.
Correct. See, the importance of IP is more acknowledged today than ever before. And India always had a good IP regime. contrary to what others may believe. But insofar as copyright is concerned, which seems to be the headline for today's US 301 report, I want to say that India is actually a victim of copyright piracy. India creates the maximum amount of creative works in the whole world, more than what Hollywood creates.
Right.
There's rampant piracy on the internet. Most of the servers which continue the piracy, online downloading, internet downloads, are all located in the US. India is a victim of copyright piracy, and therefore I believe that the US and India ought to work together on copyright piracy. And as one of the, the free trade associations from the US said in the transcript, he says, we'll take the wins when we get them, but still there's a lot to do. So I don't believe that that should be the attitude with India. India is a very vibrant democracy. There are pushes and pulls from everywhere. And in the last 24 months, the amount of work that's been done on IPR is completely unprecedented. And therefore, this report or this news report comes as a complete disappointment for me. And I hope they acknowledge the good steps that the Indian government has taken.
Right, Prathiba. You know, to be the devil's advocate over here, many would say that you need strong IPR rules because that incentivizes innovation and creativity. And, you know, and if we were to look at data from the World Intellectual Property Organizations in terms of the number of patents India files per 1 million people, India files 34.4 patents per million people, and it's way behind countries. I don't even want to, you know, mention countries like Korea and Japan, where in case of Korea it's over 4,000, in case of Japan it's over 2,500. Even in case of a country like China, you know, who filed 607 patents per million people. So many would actually throw the statistic back at India, you know, to draw this correlation that, you know, because you may not have strong IPR rules, that is why, you know, in terms of the number of patents that are filed, India is nowhere close to where it would want to be.
I'm really not sure if we should measure this only by statistics. I think the dynamics in India is very, very different. There are much more basic necessity issues that are a problem, poverty, for example. And statistics by themselves do not reflect the true condition in an economy. And I really think that the biggest problem that India faces today is the lack of a collective data maintenance mechanism on intellectual property. We need to have better data generation about how much IP is actually generated, how much IP is commercialized, how many IP cases are actually filed in the country, how many are decided in favor of the IP owner. We need to create a centralized IP database in order to be able to categorize and see where we are lacking and where we don't. However, having said that, the positives are not to be ignored. The positives have to be acknowledged and then move forward accordingly.
Right. Prathiba, then before we let you go, one final question then. In terms of this whole tool that US government uses to sort of identify countries where the IPR regime, in their words, is weak. Because Commerce Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that the very special 301 provision is in fact extraterritorial and therefore it is not compliant with the WTO. Your views, ma'am?
Correct. See, I believe that the US 301 report is something which India as a sovereign country cannot react to because it is part of US domestic law. And the US 301, to the extent that it brings out shortcomings and good positives about different countries. For example, the report also said that Ecuador and Pakistan have been removed from the US 301 report. I would really think that there are some standards that we need to, the comparative figures have to be looked at. There is huge amount of IP protection in our country. It should not be looked at only from the point of view of US American companies, but from the point of view of Indian IP owners as well. Indian IP is much, much bigger than anyone can even imagine. In trademarks, 80% of trademarks are owned by Indian IP owners. So therefore, India has its own reasons to protect IP, which is not driven by the MNCs of the world. And I think India needs a robust IP regime for its own good rather than for anyone else's good. And the US 301 report is obviously something which the US government does on its own in a unilateral manner. And I don't speak for the government, so I'm not sure of what the minister is saying. Having said that, India is a sovereign nation, and if there are any bilateral forums where these issues are taken up, India should address it in its own turn, I think.
Thank you very much, Prathiba, for that conversation and taking us through this, this issue. And hopefully, in the coming few days, we will know exactly what the US 301 report bring out. But according to the AFP report, India will once again be named in the watch list.